Hi there, welcome to my channel, Zoe and the Books. Today I'm very excited to be talking to you about all the books that I've read from the beginning of the year to the end of March. So for the last 3 months, all the books that I've read. I'm gonna put my stat wrap up. I read 27 books between January and March. I read the most books in February with 12 books. Of note on the kind of genre portion, I read a number of thrillers. That's the only one that, of all the genres that are up there, thriller is a little bit out of the ordinary for me. And I read more thrillers than I normally would as a result of the Killing Eve vlog that I put out. My best reading month by average was January, and my worst was March because I gave out a 1-star review. But each month, luckily, every single month had a 5-star read, which I was really fortunate to have happen because in previous years, that's not always the case. Sometimes I'll go several months without, or a couple months without having a 5-star read. You'll also see that I read a ton of books in print, which, looking at previous years, it's usually a more even kind of breakup for me. It's usually like a third for print books, audiobooks, ebooks. I think one reason that I read fewer audiobooks than I normally do is because I was reading one of Brandon Sanderson's books in the Stormlight Archive. Those books are 50 to 60 hours long. It takes me a long time to get through them, and so I'm just not able to turn through as many audiobooks as I normally would. One thing that's not on my stat wrap up, I got 21 of my books from the library, or Libby, of the 27. 4 of them were gifted to me. 1 I purchased myself, and then 1 was like a friend and family member exchange. And so I'll show you physically the books that I still have with me. It's a small stack. I have 5 still with me. I'm going to get rid of 4 of these books. I'm only going to keep 1 of them. And we can talk through a little bit of that now. I'm gonna quickly run through all the books that I read for vlogs and just give my rating for them. If you'd like to see more in-depth reviews of the thoughts that I had on these books, please watch the vlog. Most of these books I dedicated 10 to 20 minutes on a piece, and so you'll have a lot more in-depth, fleshed out thoughts for all these books. But for now, I'll give you the vlog that they were in, and they were in the rating. So for the very first vlog that I put out, the New York Times Notable Books of 2025, I read The South by Tash Shaw, and I gave it a 4.25. I read The Containment by Michelle Adams, and I gave it a 4.0. I read August Lane by Regina Black, and I gave it a 3.5. And then finally, I read The Peep Show by Kate Summerscale, and I gave it a 4.25. The next vlog that I did, I let a spinner wheel and a random number generator determine which books from the NPR's Books We Love list I was going to read. And I got to 3 books, the first of which was Girl on Girl by Sophie Gilbert, and I gave that a 3.5. I read The Last Tiger by Julia Ryu and Brad Ryu, and I gave that a 3.5 as well. And then the last book that I read for that vlog was called Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray, and I gave that a 4.25. For my Killing Eve vlog, I read the original 3 novellas by Luke Jennings that inspired the TV show by the same name, Killing Eve, which was produced by BBC but is now available on Netflix, at least in the United States. I gave the first 2 books, so Codename Villanelle and No Tomorrow, I gave both of those a 4.25. And then the last book in the series, the last novella, Die For Me, I gave a 3.25. For my gifted books vlog, where I read all the books that have been gifted to me over the last 5-ish years, I read What Would Frida Do by Ariana Davis, which I have in person, and I can show you. I gave this a 3.25. I read Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage, and I gave it a 5. Although I will say, the epilogue almost took the 5-star away. So, and I didn't really talk about this in the vlog, so I guess I'll say it here. The epilogue, and there are definitely people who are like this, just like moved a lot faster than I think I was ready for these 2 characters to move. And I don't know, epilogues can be hit or miss in romances. Sometimes they give you like all the things that you need to feel happy about how a romance ended, and other times like totally obliterates whatever feelings you had. And in this case, I almost wish I hadn't read the epilogue. But I just decided to kind of delete that from my brain and just focus on like the main reading experience, and that's why I left it as a 5, because it really was so wonderful until I got to that point. So anyways, I gave Lost and Lasted a 5, and I'm sticking with that, even though the epilogue was not my favorite. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere. I think, oh, it's on my shelves. I'm not gonna go get it. I read Today I Made a Difference, which was edited by Joseph Underwood. I gave it a 3.0. And then finally, I read The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins, and I gave it a 1 star. I don't want to give this any more wavelength than it deserves, but I genuinely think that for some people, this would be actively harmful and should not be substituted for an actual professional's advice. And I'll leave it at that. I have a lot more thoughts in my vlog if you want to hear them. And my final vlog that I put out before you'll be seeing this, I read Swift River by S.E. Chambers, and I gave it a 4.5. I read Good Material by Dolly Alderton. I gave it a 4.5 as well. And then finally, I read How to Say Babylon by Safia Sinclair, and I gave it a 4.0. So overall, I enjoyed all my different reading vlogs that I put out. I think my most successful one was definitely the Read with Jenna vlog. I think if you are looking for a sense of like what I like to read and kind of my reading taste and my reading preferences, all the books that I read in that are like a pretty good indicator of the things that I like to read, aside from like maybe fantasy and sci-fi. I didn't really cover that in that vlog. Read some really good books, even if they weren't all 5-star reads. Had a really valuable time doing it. But now I really want to get into the 10 books that I read for my own personal pleasure and that I didn't cover in vlogs. I'm going to go in chronological order, so I'm going to start with the first book that I read this year that wasn't for a vlog, and then we'll end with the last book that I read for this year that wasn't a vlog, or until March, that wasn't for a vlog. I've read these books for a number of reasons. Some of it is just for like personal pleasure. I wanted to read it. Sounded fun. Others were for my in-person, or like it's not in-person, but like my in real life book club, which meets monthly, and we read books that are under 300 pages. We meet every single month, and so every single month I had a book for that. And then also some of the books that I've read are for challenges, like the Buzzword Challenge by Books and Lala. I'm reading 2 books. I'm trying to read 2 books a month for those. Sometimes I kind of fudge it, but quite a few of the books that I've read in this list are for that challenge. So the first book that I read this year that wasn't for a vlog was To Be Taught Fortunate by Becky Chambers, and I gave it a 4.75 out of 5. I really loved everything about this book. We selected this for my IRL book club, and I guess to just tell you a little bit about what was happening in the book. It's a novella. It's very short. I think it's around 150-ish pages, but basically a crew of 4 human beings is doing a series of deep space exploration kind of missions. They're sent from Earth to go to 3 different planets and do a number of experiments and try to learn as much as they can. And while they're on that mission, they learn some things that complicate the journey that they're on. And for me, this book was everything that I love about science fiction. I just thought it so perfectly captured the wonder, the details, the exploration, the horror and the panic of deep space exploration, but also at the same time the curiosity that scientists naturally feel. And then also just, I think the best science fiction captures the indomitable human spirit and also poses larger moral and philosophical questions eloquently without it being forced. There were so many beautiful quotes littered throughout this book, and I just felt like she framed big topics about, is it right for us to be doing exploration for the sake of exploration, and like what are the impacts of that for both humans but also the places that we're exploring, as well as many other topics. I just think she just framed them so effortlessly and did it so well. On top of that, for it being such a short book, she built tension so well in like multiple scenes. It wasn't just one time. It just wasn't just like, oh, there's like one crazy tense scene. No, it was like multiple scenes feeling the tension of anything that can go wrong on these journeys. But then she also captured like the joy that these 4 individuals had with each other and as a part of their journey. And it was just a real joy to follow along with and to experience. For me, this little novella was just a joyous celebration of the human condition, in part because of the setting. Being in a fundamentally non-human setting really pushed forward the absolute humanity of the characters that we're following and the humanity behind the things that they're doing. And I thought it was really well done. And I really look forward to reading more by Becky Chambers. The next book that I read for myself because it's my understanding, and I should fact check this, but I think it's Jane Austen's like 250th birthday. Or maybe that happened last year and people are still celebrating it. And I think there's also like a number of adaptations coming out for some of her other books, but I read Emma by Jane Austen. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5. I liked it. I really did. But the reason I read it is because I really loved Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, and I've been meaning to read Pride and Prejudice because I remember I watched the movie when I was pretty young, maybe like 12 or 13. I loved the movie and I loved Keira Knightley. So anyways, I'm on a Jane Austen kick, and I read Emma because I just feel like there's quite a few people in the reader community who have also read Emma and just really rave about kind of the comedy in it and Emma as a character and some of the things that happen in this book. And so I guess I'll tell you a little bit about what's happening in this book. Emma is a young lady who is like marriage eligible, but she is basically committed to not marrying and instead wants to play matchmaker for all of her friends who are coming and visiting her or who are in her kind of, I don't want to say neighborhood's not the right term, but in her like village, if you will, and of her station. But I think Emma is what we in like modern romance tropes would call like a friends to lover premise. And, you know, slowly but surely it takes like almost 500 pages, but slowly but surely we get there. And, you know, I really liked the romance development between Emma and the male main character. I don't want to spoil it. In case you've never read it, because there's like a couple male characters who could be her love interest. I'll just say, for me, as much as I liked the romantic development and I liked a lot of the banter and some of the interactions between people, there were times when I felt like the plot was moving really slow and the dialogue was really slow. And I get that that's a reflection of the time of like, okay, we're going to go to this person's house and we're going to sit down and we're going to have tea and we're going to just like chit chat about the things that are happening in the village and whatever. But it just, for me, it was just a little bit slow, and that's okay. But I'll just say, getting through it, getting to the end was incredibly rewarding. Like, forcing yourself to get through that, even though at times it did feel like a little bit of a drudge, was well worth it. And just, yeah, again, incredibly rewarding. And I think the funny thing about Emma as a character, not as a book, Emma's behavior at times can be absolutely atrocious. She makes assumptions. She does things that are just probably not the wisest. She just can be really selfish at times. But even so, she's so charming and for the most part, like, well-intentioned, and you just can't help but like her and root for her and like want the best of her. Another thing I'll say that I really liked about Emma is I just love Jane Austen's depictions of the English countryside and Victorian era life, the garden parties, the tea, the dances. And I just think it was very much a slow burn in the romance side, the way that she built up tension between Emma and the male, the male interest, if you will. I think it's well worth a read, and I think if I were to ever reread it, I would probably appreciate it more than I did when I was reading it the first time. Initiating a little bit of a vibe switch, I read a book called After the Last Border by Jessica Goudeau. I gave it a 5-star. It was my first 5-star of the year, and I read this for my buzzword challenge. And basically what we're doing is we are following 2 different refugee families as they navigate the United States' refugee admissions process. One is but not just that, also as they're escaping their home countries, as they are applying for asylum, applying to be refugees, navigating the refugee resettlement process, getting resettled in the United States, and like kind of trying to develop a life for themselves, and then also the implications for their families who they have children and whatever. And we are exploring these families specifically through the lenses of the like matriarchs of the families. Jessica Goudeau spent years interviewing both women. One woman is a woman from Myanmar who was in a refugee camp in Thailand for, I don't remember exactly how long it was, but like probably a decade or so. She went there when she was really young. She ended up crossing back into Myanmar at one point, came back out and finished out like most of her secondary schooling. And then she got married. She had children in Thailand in this refugee camp, and then was eventually informed that she would be resettled in the United States in the like early to mid 2000s. And the other woman that we are following is a woman from Syria who is married and has, I think, 4 kids. And we follow her as she tries to withstand kind of the persecution that Syrians were facing in Syria. And we watch her as she escapes to Lebanon, as her family members escape to Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East, and how she decides to apply for asylum in order to keep one of her youngest daughter in school in Lebanon. They basically made a decision, because there were so many refugees, people who were coming in from Syria, that if you weren't being like formally processed to try to get asylum somewhere else, they weren't going to be willing to continue to offer educational opportunities. And so she applied for asylum on a whim, and eventually, after dozens of interviews with her daughter, her husband, they were granted asylum in the United States, and they were told that they would be able to be reunited with the rest of their families. But unfortunately, these are happening at 2 different times. The woman from Myanmar I mentioned is resettled in the mid 2000s. The woman from Syria is resettled in like 2020, right after President Trump was elected for the first time. And at around that time, if you're not familiar, our refugee resettlement system was kind of turned on its head, and for lack of a better word, kind of turned off. We stopped resettling refugees, and also stopped, once we reopened resettlement, we kept it turned off from certain high-risk areas, including Syria. And so the Syrian woman, she was anticipating that her other children, some of whom did not survive coming out of Syria, but the ones who had, she was anticipating that they would be able to resettle with her in the United States. And that hope and dream was fractured as a result of some of the policy choices that were made. When I was reading it, I was reading it during the ice surge in Minneapolis, and yeah, for me, it was just an emotionally really heavy read. But I think this book absolutely needs to be part of the literature as we are collectively talking about rights of immigrants. Refugees are kind of a special class of immigrants, but ones that today, our refugee admissions for the United States are capped at less than 10,000. At the height of the U.S. refugee resettlement program, we were resettling over 200,000 refugees. And that was in the 80s. More recently, in the kind of 2015 to 2020 era, we were settling kind of more between 70 to 80,000 annually. And I think the really important thing to note about refugees is that refugees are individuals who are being persecuted on account of their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. And in the case of refugees, they cannot go home safely. And that's not to say that refugees are more important than other types of immigrants. It's just to say that we should still be keeping refugees in mind as we are having larger debates about other kinds of immigrants in this country. And we should be retaining a level of compassion for people who are being persecuted on account of their political opinions, on account of their religion, things of that nature. And this story, looking at these two women and their families, it was so poignant and it was so breathtaking the way that this author was able to negotiate their stories and telling their stories, but then also injecting her own analysis and her own findings about our refugee resettlement process and kind of some of the politics around the U.S. refugee resettlement program. I just also think her style of writing was so impactful. I don't know another way to say it, but in so many of these scenes, I literally felt like I was with these women. The level of description was so detailed. Their hurt, I felt. This was the first book this year that made me cry. I sobbed. I felt goosebumps. My stomach dropped. I just felt so invested in these women's lives. And even afterwards, I was trying to look up, kind of what's happened to them. But for the sake of protecting these women, she gave them, pseudonyms. So we don't have their real names, which is for the better to, protect them and protect their identities. But genuinely felt so invested in these women's lives. And I was just so impressed with the empathy that was conveyed for refugees in this book, and I just would highly recommend it for anyone who is trying to learn more, broaden their horizons on the kind of discussions and debates about immigration in the United States right now, and is trying to ground themselves on the topic in general. Would just highly, highly, highly recommend this really personal story, to just give that human perspective to what people are really going through as they try to come to the United States or other countries when they're fleeing really horrifying situations, like the situation in Syria where Assad was using chemical weapons against his own human beings, the situation in Myanmar where the military junta is deliberately going about literally raping and pillaging entire villages. So just highly, highly, highly recommend. Okay, Vibe Switch 2.0. Okay, next up, I read Butcher and Blackbird. And I read this for my buzzword cover challenge. I was looking for internal body parts, and hopefully you can see there's skulls and little bones, and so I'm going to review this as part of a vlog where I'm going to talk about books that I bought when I was first getting back into reading, and this was one of those books that I bought because it was really popular at the time when I was getting back into reading, and I liked the idea of two serial killers falling in love and it just being kind of a campy fun rom-com time, but I Okay, I'll start by saying I gave this a 3.0 out of 5. I didn't love this book. There were like a lot of things, a lot of problems that I had with this book. A lot of things that I didn't enjoy about this book. But there were parts of it that were fun, that were campy, that were just like, that did make me laugh out loud and did make me giggle and did make me feel like, oh, this is crazy. What's going on? I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe someone wrote this. But basically, the premise of this is kind of exactly as I said. These two serial killers meet, and they're serial killers, but they only kill bad guys. It's like Dexter. They meet under these like kind of weird circumstances. They just like meet. I don't know. And the guy, Rowan, I think his name is Rowan. I don't remember. Basically, Butcher. He gets Blackbird out of a bad situation, and they like get dinner and they talk, and he has like insta love feelings for her. And from there, they decide they're gonna meet up every year for like a competition and see who can like take down a bad guy first. From someone, one of his brothers like picks a target and is like, he's a bad guy, go get him. Whoever gets him first wins. They do this for a couple of years, and over that time kind of fall in love. Great. Okay, fine. It was fine. Like, point blank period. It was fine. Like, it wasn't good. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was fine. I think the things that I really didn't like, especially around the romance, like some of the sex scenes just felt really heavy-handed for me. Like, just when, like, if you want smutty, and this isn't like, I'm not a prude, okay? And like, this probably isn't like the spiciest thing out there. For me, it was just like the length of the sex scenes. I was like, okay. And how many there were. At some point I was like, I feel like I've read, what is this, like a 300-page book? What is this? Yeah, okay, like a 330-page book. And I'm reading like 100 pages of sex scenes. We've lost the plot, okay? And if that's what you're looking for, literally no shame, just not my preference. And then also, because it's an interconnected series where like his brothers also get the opportunity to fall in love and like we get to follow their stories, I just think there were a couple points where the author was trying to get us introduced to them, because this is the first book in the series, where it felt a little bit distracting, and I could have done with less of the other brothers and more of like this couple and establishing this couple and their relationship and the depth of their relationship. And while we did do some of that, the conflict that they had kind of, in my mind, totally obliterated so much of the progress that these two made, considering how long it took them to like get to a point of like getting over their fears and like being with each other. I guess the last thing that bothered me with this book is, for being like a serial killer book, there were some pretty major plot holes around some of the crimes that they were committing, the fact that like no one could catch on to them despite like the clues and the hints that they were leaving behind. And I'll talk more about this in my blog. I have like a pretty extended section where I talk about like the plot holes and the things that I didn't like about it. So that was Butcher and Blackbird for me. It's kind of a mixed bag. Okay, the next book that I read, again, vibe shift. I read Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx for my book club, my in real life book club for February. And basically the idea is that two cowboys, when they're like 18, 19, in the late 60s, are hired on to herd some sheep through like the Wyoming wilderness over the summer to get them fattened up before they get sold to become livestock and like meat. And over that summer, these two cowboys basically like fall in love, but have a really hard time admitting their sexuality, one to each other, but also to themselves. And partly for the time era, partly for their location, partly for their occupation. Both of these men choose, rather than trying to make a life together, to kind of go separate ways and, you know, do the cowboy thing. And we examine their lives as they play out, and, you know, some of the feelings that they have, some of the repercussions of living like a repressed homosexual life. And, you know, I thought it was a really like beautiful and poignant exploration of like one's repressed sexuality. Again, whether that's a result of the time or the geography or their own emotions or their occupation, or maybe kind of a violent combination of all four of those things. It was really interesting to see the risks that these men were willing to take or not when it came to each other and others, in trying to fulfill some of their desires. And the other thing that I'll say that I really loved about this book is that I just think that Annie Proulx really perfectly captured the feeling of the West. For me, it felt very nostalgic. I just think she also perfectly captured like the mannerisms and the speaking style of cowboys, which sometimes when you're reading Westerns, I don't know, it's like something you pick up on, whether it's like someone who's like speaking with like an authentic voice or not. And for me, I felt like she had an authentic voice in telling this Western, even though the topic is very like not Western, or like something that at least historically was kind of shunned in the West, and even to this day has been shunned in the West to some extent, at least in the West that I'm talking about, the cowboying West. But overall, I thought this was a really brilliant story about desire, time, memory, grief, and regret in a time of cowboys, and I really would like to read some more by Annie Proulx. Okay. The next book that I read was The Exchange by John Grisham. And I gave this a 2 out of 5. I thought this book was not good. But I read this for my Buzzword cover challenge, and I'm really, 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 really trying to pull books from my shelves when possible. It's kind of my policy that I only want 5-star books on my shelves, or books that I think I would reread at some point. And so I try to kind of cycle through, and for books that I'm not going to keep, I want to read them so that I can give them to libraries or sell them or put them in a little free library or whatever, which is exactly what I'll be doing with this book. And it's kind of interesting because this is like not a book I ever would have picked for myself. That's not to say, like, I think there are other John Grishams that I might have read, or I might be willing to read, including some of his older, like original legal thrillers, or even like, I think he just recently put one out called The Widow that I feel like has gotten like relatively decent reviews. But this one in particular is like I wouldn't call it like a sequel to The Firm, which he put out in like, I don't know, maybe the 90s, and it was one of his more popular books. But anyways, my grandma Callie gave this to me after both of my grandparents read it, and I don't know, for me, for it being a legal thriller, it just was not thrilling at all. And I guess to tell you a little bit about the premise, we are following Mitch and Abby, who were from The Firm. And Mitch, basically, I don't know, for the first 25% of the book, I think he's gonna go and do something that is like related to what was happening in The Firm. And then he's kind of rerouted to take over for an old mentor of his, like a big deal in the Middle East, dealing with like trying to get a settlement from a country after a firm had done a bunch of like building in this Middle Eastern country. the Middle Eastern country didn't want to give the firm the money. They didn't think they did a good job. Basically, Mitch was given this case and told to like get the settlement taken care of. And so Mitch and his old mentor, who he took the case over from, and daughter, Giovanna, they go to this Middle Eastern country. I feel bad. I can't remember which one it is, which is totally messed up. I could probably look on the back and figure it out. Let me see. Libya. It's Libya. Okay. So Mitch and Giovanna go to Libya to try to like do an assessment of the build that their client had done. And everything goes wrong. And then we spend the rest of the book trying to fix everything that went wrong. And I'm not going to say what went wrong because I don't want to spoil it. But basically, for me, there were like no twists and turns. It wasn't like all that exciting. And it just felt like such a bureaucratic slog going from office to office to try to fix what went wrong. It felt very much like my day job of like, call this person, email this person, call this person, go visit this person. I was like, I don't need to read that. I don't need to read that. I do enough of that in my day-to-day. I'm good. And also the writing style literally felt like he was like, and then, and then, and then, and then, and then. And and then I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to keep reading this. But I got it on audio. I didn't actually read this physical copy. I read it on audio. It was a very quick read on audio, and so I just kind of let it happen. But I think my biggest problem with this book is that it used characters from The Firm, one of his iconic books, and it didn't need to. There was like no real callback, no real connection to The Firm, except for like what kind of happened in the first 100, not even 100 pages, like maybe first 50 pages. When he traveled down to Memphis or wherever the heck it was, he had like a little bit of closure. We didn't need any of that. We didn't need Mitch and Abby to be dealing with this case. He could have written it with any other character and the story would have been 100% the same. I think I don't know if he was trying to capitalize on the success of The Firm and like the name recognition of The Firm, but for me, like not a success. And for like also like the brilliance that they said Mitch had from the time in The Firm, I didn't see that. Like when we were reading this, the whole time I was like, dude, Mitch is kind of an idiot. Like Mitch is not acting decisively. He's not thinking outside of the box. Like nothing about this is like exciting. If he was gonna go for like an after The Firm approach, like trying to capitalize on what he did so well in The Firm, I would have liked if we were more closely tied to the things that happened there, whether it was dealing with the mafia or if we did something in Memphis or if he was reconnecting with old colleagues. I don't know. I mean, we did get like, there was like a tiny bit of relevance at the end to like help fix the problem. But like, again, it didn't need to be Mitch and Abby. It could have been anyone else. Could have come up with some other solution without Mitch and Abby being written in. I don't know. Overall, wouldn't recommend. And probably, like, I haven't read any of John Grisham's other works, but I would imagine they are probably better than this. So that's my feeling on that. The next book that I read was Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5, which was better than Oathbringer, but not as good as Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. Yeah. I gave both Way of Kings and Words of Radiance a 4.5. I gave Oathbringer, I think, a 3.25. That one didn't go very well for me. And then I'm giving this one a 3.75. Okay, this one took me a while to get through because it was like a 61-hour audiobook, as I mentioned. What is the premise of this book without spoilers? This book really focused on like technical discoveries and scientific advancements. We also saw Dalinar and his team trying to convince other forces to join his side. And then this book like split the main kind of character groups apart. So there's a group that stays in Urithiru, there's a group that goes to Shadesmar to try to get additional support, and then there's another group that goes to fight on another front of the war. And I guess that's as much as I'll say without like trying to spoil it. And for people who haven't read anything of the Stormlight Archive, I'll just say in the Way of Kings, as we predominantly follow 3 people. We follow Shallan Devar, we follow Kaladin Stormblessed, and we follow Dalinar Kholin. Shallan Devar is like a noblewoman, like a pretty high-ranking noblewoman, but she has a couple secrets, and she is trying to get into the good graces of Dalinar Kholin's niece, Jasnah Kholin, who is a pretty well-established scholar, and Shallan is trying to become a scholar in her own right, but for her own reasons. Kaladin Stormblessed is, when we meet him, he is a slave who has been put on these infamous bridge crews that are literally forced to run like heavy bridges and take fire from enemy forces, from the Singers, who are like non-human kind of combatants in this world, and becomes a very important part of this story, leading the downtrodden and living up to his name, I'll say. And then Dalinar Kholin he's basically, I'll say like a warlord kind of, and Dalinar is trying very hard to unite the other warlords in this fight against the Singers, and then also to fight them against some bigger forces of evil. And so we see these 3 main characters and lots of other side characters waging a conflict against the Singers, who struck out against the humans for reasons of their own that are definitely explored in this, and not so much in this book, but definitely in future books. And it's just a very interesting, wild ride in this fantastical world, this fantastical war. And interesting enough, it's connected to some of the other books that Brandon Sanderson has read, including the Mistborn series, through various ways. So, getting back to Rhythm of War, the 4th book in the series. We are thousands of pages later at this point. Lots has happened, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll just say, I thought this book had really pretty good character development. There was some closure on some pretty major character arcs for some of the main characters that we've been following from the beginning, specifically around some of their mental health journeys. And I also think that this book gave us some really good world building in terms of Shadesmar, in terms of some of the powers at Urithiru, in terms of the sibling who is kind of like the spirit of Urithiru, who powers Urithiru, some of the Unmade, who were like powers who have been corrupted, and then, you know, some of the other powers at play within Roshar, the world that we're living within. But some of the things that I didn't love about this book is I think despite this length, to me, it felt a little bit incomplete. I felt like the ending was a little bit rushed, and that, as I mentioned, all of our characters went to different places in this book, and we didn't get closure for several of our character groups. I have now started reading the 5th book, and we kind of picked up where some of those groups left off. So I see where that happened, but it just still felt like a little bit unfinished, a little bit incomplete, in my opinion. I also think the book was pretty repetitive at some points. It felt like Brandon Sanderson didn't trust us with the information that he was presenting the first or second time. And it had to be presented over and over and over, but I don't know for what purpose. And I guess one example I'll give, one of our main characters is struggling with the multiple personality disorder kind of effect, and is really scared about the possibility of letting in an additional personality that is called Formless. And this idea of formless is repeated over and over and over and over. And I don't know if I needed the constant reminder that that was a threat and that that was a possibility. I understand it's a long book, but I just felt like I got the message the first time. I got it the second time. I didn't need it like the dozens of times that it was presented to me. And so, yeah, without getting into too much detail about The Rhythm of War, I gave it a 3.75. I thought it was fine. I thought it was better than fine. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was definitely an improvement over Oathbringer, and I think it was a good setup for the 5th book, which I'm currently reading. And I'll let you know my thoughts on that when I finish it. But moving on to my next book, I read a little novella called Remote Control by Nnedi Okorafor, and I gave it a 4.75 out of 5. I read this for my buzzword challenge in February, I believe. I think the challenge was keyboard keys, so I went for control. So the premise of this is that a young girl in a not so distant future in Ghana discovers an extraterrestrial power source and acquires it for herself, and has to very quickly deal with the repercussions of this power as she's learning how to wield it. That's the premise. And her power specifically, she has the power to like kill on touch or kill on sight. That's her power. She gives life and death. And I'll just say Nnedi Okorafor is someone that I've been wanting to read from for a very, very long time. I have seen so many people talk about Binti. I really want to read that. And then I also saw Nnedi Okorafor at the National Book Festival talking about Death of an Author. And so I had the opportunity to pick this up. I went for it. And I just felt like this book was so creative, but also just felt so grounded in like folklore and myth and some of the mystical things. And I thought it was so inventive and so thoughtful. And it was just, again, like so many of the things that I really love about science fiction. And I think why I'm saying that is because particularly some of the conversations that were happening about like health disparities and like the like willful inequities that the West imposes on, I guess I'll say, least developed nations, is like one of the ways that she kind of couched some of those bigger like philosophical and moral questions, and particularly the descriptions that she gave of malaria like really grounded that kind of, I don't want to say thesis, but like that premise, if you will, of what she was trying to describe. I also think the choice of having like a young girl as the protagonist was so brilliant, because young people typically are not as well acquainted with death, and so very quickly our young main character Sankofa had to learn how to navigate and comprehend death, not only in terms of like what she's able to do, but also in terms of how, like, as a repercussion, I guess. So, like, yes, she has that power, but also, like, there are repercussions to the things that she's able to do. And just, like, very, very quickly, she had to come to terms with that. And, framing that as kind of, like, a loss of innocence, I just thought was really brilliant. And it facilitated this really rapid character transformation, which I think was important within a novella that was, like, I don't know, like 150, not even 150 pages. Like, it was very short. And as much as it was kind of this rapid character transformation, and maybe because of that, it was also a book of like very much like coming of age and exploration of self, and also just packed a punch emotionally. There were so many things in this book as a result of people's prejudice against Sankofa for her powers that happened against this young girl that were just really emotional. And I thought it was really well done. I don't think I would recommend this book to everybody. I don't think everybody's gonna like this. There was a very ambiguous ending. Like, you got to the end and you don't know what Nnedi Okorafor is, like, maybe trying to say, or what like really happens, but for me, that was okay. Like, I got everything that I needed out of this book in terms of the bigger topics that were being raised, the conversations that I was able to have within this book, and I thought it was really well done, and I look forward to reading more by Nnedi Okorafor. The next book that I read was for my March IRL book club. We read The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. The premise is that basically we were following one boy primarily, Elwood, as he is placed into like a reform school. Okay. Elwood is placed in this reform school as a result of a crime that he literally did not commit in the Deep South in Florida. And we follow Elwood and his experience in this reform school and as he's making a friend. I'll just say, I think Colson Whitehead writes with such clarity, and he wasn't really willing to pull punches and pull back from the horrors and the atrocities that were being committed at these reform schools. He based this book, The Nickel Boys, on real life accounts and like kind of true stories of reform schools that were being that were used, especially across the South, both during the Jim Crow era and after the Jim Crow era, to try to reform young boys and some of the crimes that they were committing. And it was during those like really atrocious scenes that I felt most connected to the book, because again, he wrote with such clarity, but it was the in-between that I struggled to stay engaged with it, because Colson Whitehead is just writing about like the mundane things in these boys' lives as they're trying to navigate going to this reform school and trying to navigate some semblance of normalcy, even though there really is nothing normal about this situation. But I will say, I think there was it was a little bit deliberate the way that Colson Whitehead is writing to, one, try to make those horrors and atrocities sink in between when they're occurring, but then also to demonstrate the arbitrary nature of these schools' abuses and the people in power who are abusing these young boys. I think what saved this book for me from being like a 3 is that it really did manage to surprise me. There was like a pretty major surprise, a pretty major, I guess, kind of twist. The final book that I read between the beginning of January and the end of March was a book called This House of Sky by Ivan Doig, and I gave it a 5. My third 5. I read this for the Buzzword Challenge for March. It was like this and that and those. So This House of Sky. The premise of this book is basically, it's a memoir. Ivan Doig was born in Montana, and his parents are ranchers, or sheep ranchers, and the premise of this is basically he's recounting his life growing up in Montana, and not only through his own experiences, but also through the experiences of his mom, his dad, and his grandma. And I loved everything about this memoir. I'm a sucker for memoirs. I love memoirs. But this one in particular, because I'm from Montana, the descriptions of Montana, its people, the challenges of ranching. Like, I think people watch Yellowstone and they think like, oh my God, I want to go to Montana. I want to get a ranch. I want to retire. It's so amazing. But like, this for me is authentic. Ivan's experiences, it was just, yeah, again, like authentically captured everything that I like know about Montana, everything I love about Montana, but also like the things that I struggle with Montana about. Like, he was like very candid about feeling worried about his career prospects in Montana and feeling the distance between himself and his aging relatives, and just some of the brutality of ranching lifestyle. Like, those are all things that like personally resonated with me as someone who grew up in Montana and like made the decision to leave Montana in order to, you know, make a life for myself. Those are, you know, people ask me all the time, like, oh my God, why would you ever leave Montana? It's like, well, really, like, it's pretty difficult to like make a life for yourself there, at least in the things that I wanted to do for myself. And I really appreciated that Ivan was so open and forthcoming about some of that stuff. And he really captured kind of some of the like heartbreaking challenges around that. And it just really resonated with me. I think too, sometimes when you read a memoir, like usually people, I mean, do like a really good job of storytelling, but his memories were just so bright and vivid. Like he's able to recount so many details from his memory. I was just thoroughly impressed. Like there was one scene where they're going through lambing season, where basically all the little lambs have been born, but they have to go through and count all these lambs and brand them and make sure that they're like ready to go during the summer, while they're gonna herd them and get them fattened up before they sell them. And he went on for pages recounting like this scene of the lambing season and like how he was responsible for the count and keeping track and who's shouting what, who's doing it. Like, I don't know, the details were just so vivid, and I was just so impressed by that he could remember so long ago so well. And then I really resonated with some of his observations about family, about Montana in general, some of the history that he was talking about, and just the heritage of being a Montanan. It just felt really profound and like deeply personal, not only for him, but also for me. And I just really appreciated everything about this memoir. It was a little slow for sure. Like not everyone's gonna love that. But again, like I felt like it was so rewarding to get through. I just loved it. So those are all the books that I have read for between the beginning of January and the end of March. I think overall it was a really good quarter of reading for me. I'd like never give out 1 stars. That was a bummer to have to give out a 1 star. But the fact that I got a 5 star in every single month, I feel really good about that. I feel really good about like some of the vlogs that I put out. I had a lot of fun doing them. And then just my personal reading too. I'm like just happy that I was able to manage balancing all that. But then I also want to talk about like some of my other obsessions from the quarter, if anyone cares. Okay, so I told you all I read Emma. I also watched the movie adaptation with Anya Taylor-Joy that was put out in like 2020 or 2021. That, for me, was like perfection. That was everything that I wanted out of the book. It like cut away some of the dry dialogue and like slow plot development, and it just, but like kept all the comedy, kept all the banter, kept everything that was like so good about Emma and consolidated it into like this really fun and stylized adaptation. I just thought it was really well done. Sticking in like not really that time era, but like I guess a little bit after, I watched season 4 of Bridgerton. When I did my Killing Eve vlog, I told you all about like all the shows that I watch, and I left 2 shows off of there. One was Bridgerton. I do watch Bridgerton pretty religiously. Season 4, how would I rank Bridgerton? I would rank Daphne's season. Oh, this is hard. I think I would rank Daphne's season number 1, Antony's season number 2, Benedict's season number 3, and Colin's season number 4. And if you have questions on that, happy to answer them in the comments. And then also I've been watching a little bit of Downton Abbey. I actually just finished season 3 today, and I know I'm really behind on this, but if anyone's seen Downton Abbey season 3, my heart's broken. This show just like never ceases to ruin my little heart, and it's fine. It's fine. Okay, but then also this quarter, in this last quarter, Top Chef and Next Level Chef returned. Top Chef is the like OG GOAT of reality cooking shows. I watch every single season. I fucking love Top Chef. So I'm so happy it's back. So happy it's back. When I did my Killing Eve vlog, I didn't mention any of the reality TV shows I watch. I do watch quite a bit of like competition reality television, and not so much like other kinds of reality television. Like I don't watch like Real Housewives or stuff like that, but competition reality TV shows I do like. And so very happy that Top Chef and Next Level Chef are back. We had MLB. Major League Baseball is also back. I am freaking stoked for that. The Mariners, at the start of the season, Mariners are my favorite team, power ranked number 2 after the Dodgers. They have, I don't know, they're like 50-50 right now, so that's kind of depressing, but I trust that they will pull it together, especially after some of the trades that we made in the offseason. Okay, for food, one thing that I have been obsessed with this last quarter is spring rolls from Whole Foods. Very specific, very niche. I can't get over them. Every time we go to Whole Foods, I get like 3 spring rolls and ruin my plans for eating for the rest of the day, but can't help myself. For other YouTube channels, I recently discovered Desmond Z. He does like book content. He did this really amazing video where he looked at the most checked out books at like major cities across the country. I thought that was so cool. But he just makes me laugh. All of his content makes me laugh. I just love him. He's just so authentically himself, and 10 out of 10. I'll link him below. And then the other YouTube channel that I want to shout out is a YouTube channel called NTS. They do like curated playlists based on like really hyper specific vibes. And so when I was reading The Containment, I listened to a really interesting playlist that was like different songs from Detroit from like the 60s. Which was really cool. I've been kind of obsessed with some of their like really niche playlists, and I would recommend you check them out. Last but not least, some music that I've been obsessed with. I don't listen to as much music as I used to because I listen to almost exclusively audiobooks, but sometimes I'll listen to music at work, and my go-tos are Olivia Dean, Florence and the Machine, and Ray. Obsessed. Obsessed. And yeah, that was my quarter. Again, yeah, I feel really good about it. Very happy with some of the books that I read. And I hope you will join me as I continue to read lots of really fun and exciting books. And I will update you next quarter and we'll see how many I get through. But thanks so much for joining. I'll talk soon.